Good afternoon and welcome to St. Mark's Lutheran and our Bible study. Today we are doing a study about the rich fool from the parables of Luke, the 12th chapter, verses 13 through 34. I am using the NIV, the New International Version of the Scriptures, and let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord God, as we study your word, help us to open our minds to understand what it is you are attempting to teach us and instruct us in. Help us to understand that being rich does not necessarily mean that all is well, but that we need to depend on you and your word and your guidance. We pray this, O Lord, in your name. Amen. Today we're looking at the parable of the rich fool, and it's interesting that there's a little difference between Mark and Matthew's version because of the emphasis that he places on the rich individual, whether it's ultimately God or the riches or the greed. And here he lifts up the greed. So let's read this together, and you'll hear different words, and I'm going to stop and speak about some of those. Verse 13 of Luke 12. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher," and really that is meaning rabbi, because he was the rabbi here. And many times rabbis at this time were used to help in disputes between a family or whatever. Tell my brother. It isn't ask the brother, it's tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. And it causes us to stop and think, what do we do not only if we receive an inheritance, but if we are lucky enough to be like the owner here with a problem of crops being very good, and how do you divide it? How do you do it? And I stop and think of one of my individuals when I was in western Iowa. He had his corn stored from 4 years. In fact, it had cost him more for storage than it had in selling it. Now, to say something about this gentleman, when he did pass away, he didn't own a car. When he went into town, he drove the tractor. He had probably a 30-year-old coat, very frugal, but he left to Wartburg College about $2 million. So he was very generous with that, but still, you wonder, what is he thinking? So here in this inheritance, and Jesus replies, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbitrator between you and your brother?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed." Are there more than one kind of greed out there? What do you think he means when he says all greed, or any kind of greed?
Greed for different things, possibly.
Okay, what else could it be?
Yeah, for money, for relationships. It's a wanting.
So wanting, and as he goes on to say, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Because we've moved often over the years, it seems like you collect things very quickly that you then, when you come to move, you say, do I really need this? And you say, no, and then you say, well, why did I need it to begin with? And I would imagine every person when they go through their house, could find hundreds of things, hundreds of possessions that we may not need, may not really serve any purpose. Yet, at the time, we feel we need them. Is that what this is about? Or is greed talking about more than that?
Wanting what somebody else has, that's not necessarily something you need. You just may not want them to have it.
You may not want them to have it, or you want to be like the Joneses and keep up with
Well,
the
that's
neighbor.
true too.
So you have both, and I'm going to say that's an attitude
It is, yeah.
that we can have about possessions. And there are things that we're going to find that are going to be helpful as we go through this. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? And listen to the I that's in
There's a lot
this.
of I in this
There's a
story.
lot of I. It's almost being self-centered.
It is.
What shall I do? I have no place to store my crop. Then he said, that is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grains. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how I will deal with it. Whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich towards God. And it is that towards God
Yeah.
that we need to emphasize here, that do we share God's purpose, God's will, God's directive with those things that we have. And we don't have to have lots of things to be able to share with somebody. Yes, we can share money or possessions. We can share food. But we can also share a love and an acceptance. There are many kinds of things that we can do that we have received that we fail to do. And then verse 22, Jesus said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens, they do not sow or reap, they have no storerooms or barns, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? And how many of us worry about things?
Mm-hmm.
How many of us worry about houses? And I'm thinking of the daughter who's in the process of selling a house, 4 bedrooms, living room, formal dining, kitchen, back porch, side porch. And as people have gone through, they're saying, well, it's not big enough. We've got to have a bigger lot. We've got to have a bigger whatever. Mm-hmm. What's in us that makes us want to have bigger and better? And what's bigger and better?
I think we see what others have and want something similar
Or better than.
or better than. Yeah.
And yet, is that what we should be? As Christians, I'm not talking about the non-believer, but as
Right.
Christians.
More focused on what we need, as opposed to what we might want. And be thankful for having what we need. Be satisfied with that.
Okay. You use the word satisfied. Define that in terms of being satisfied with a bigger house.
Well, if my objective is to have a house that looks like someone else's and it's bigger than someone else's, well, then it satisfies that desire. My desire is a selfish desire. I'm satisfying my wants, as opposed to what we should do, as I should do as a Christian, is satisfy myself by looking to Christ. And my desires should be towards Christ and increasing that relationship, and being happy with whatever I have.
As I drive down Ocean Boulevard, every time I come to church, basically, and see some of those houses,
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't afford the taxes on that per year, let alone a house payment on those. But they are big, two-story. There's one that they've been building for several years, 7-car garage. I mean, I have one vehicle, and why would I need 7 stalls for cars? Is that show? Is it need? Is it greed? What is it?
Maybe it's a little of all.
A little of all, okay,
Lovely.
possibly. But there's beautiful homes there.
Oh, absolutely. I've always seen those, yes.
Those,
But
I'm sure, have been there for years, many of them.
they have.
But, and I just look at the fact that we live in a fifth wheel, and that's actually big enough for the two of us. Plus, we have the little casita that, we can use at times, and Alice uses it for sewing, and I have my office in there. But how much space do we really need?
Right.
And that's the question that I think this is trying to get at. What is that attitude that we have in terms of dealing with this? 1 Timothy 6:10 says, the love of money is the root of all evil. Is that true?
The love of money.
Yeah, the love of money.
Mhm.
We need money, that's
The
the
love
way.
of anything, any asset that you would not let go of, and you collect
Or
more of
hoard.
it. Mhm.
Okay. A term that could be applied to that is materialism.
Yeah.
Right.
How much materialism is in our world today?
Very much so.
Yeah.
It's a consumer society.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, how does that materialism, that pulling all of those possessions to I, me, what risk does that put us at?
Spiritual risk in that focusing only on yourself and not others, but also in the world, you put yourself at risk of being robbed. You put yourself at risk for being buried under your own stuff like a hoarder. So mostly it's that spiritual loss.
But where does that attitude, when does it change? How can it change? to go from simply accepting what we need to needing more? Or from having more, how do we learn to deal with sharing that or giving that to others? What's that attitude? Where does it come from?
I think it comes from Christ and his commissions, what he wants us to do. But also it comes from by looking to see what others do, looking at examples. And so as Christians, we should exemplify that so that others can see that and use it as an example.
Okay.
If you are, everybody has their own, has an attitude. And if you haven't learned to share and love others and look for others to see what's happening in their lives, if you're always just worried about yourself, you're either the center of attention or you're the most important, you have this feeling. You get all this stuff and you're going to save it for yourself and you're not going to share it. I don't know, it's a personal feeling, and unless people see what they could do with those things and help others, and they change that attitude from self to what can I do to help somebody else and share. And it's the love your neighbor thing we've been learning about. So.
Okay. What that's covetousness.
Yes.
How do we break ourselves of coveting riches, wealth, possessions, power? I mean, the list just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, it is.
Where we want to hold that so that it is what we are in charge of versus something else. We're back now and happy to have. Is the fool just the one who denies God's existence? Or how would we define, it's talking here about the rich fool, but it seems like he's denying the existence of God. Would you agree with that or disagree?
I don't know that he's denying it. He's either forgetting about it or focused away from it. Because he feels that riches are money and wealth in the world.
Okay.
And he has all this time to enjoy it.
Okay.
Good luck. Hope you wake up in the morning.
Okay.
You don't know how long you have.
Right.
Okay. Are most deniers of God accumulators of wealth? Or are Christians equally as guilty?
I think it's equal.
There are Christians that accumulate wealth. Maybe not. Maybe they're good at accumulating it. If they share it, it's a great thing.
Christians and non-believers, we're all just as susceptible to sin. And we sin.
Sure,
And we sin.
yeah. You can deny God and either be poor or middle class or wealthy
Right.
and be denying God. I'm not sure that the wealth is a show of that, so. Could be,
But
but
what
not
we do with the
necessarily.
wealth
Right.
is,
Right, what you do with it.
how can we help our fellow brethren and sisters in the church to have the attitude of sharing, of being open to share what they have? In fact, and the reason I ask that is, how many of us throw out stuff that's good rather than giving it
Mhm.
away or sharing?
Probably.
How many of us take stuff to Salvation Army or Goodwill that we could just as well share with? And I know some churches have pantries and clothes closets to be able to share the things they have.
Mhm.
What are reasons that we don't do more of that?
Wow, it's inconvenient, maybe.
Inconvenient?
I think that's the first thing. Oh, I'm gonna have to, you have to pack it up, put it in the car and take it. If you don't have a car, you pack it up and you gotta find somebody that will pick it up and take it for you.
Okay. So,
So it's much easier to throw it in the dumpster
okay.
if you're gonna get rid of it.
And how many millions of dollars
Mm.
just are thrown away for lack of, and I know, Rolean, you don't drive, I
Yeah.
understand very well why it would be hard, and you are probably in what, a one-bedroom apartment?
One
So you don't have a lot of accumulated things.
I'm trying not to accumulate it again.
But I'm thinking of people who have houses. And I
Yeah,
know I stop and think of my
been there.
brother who had Alzheimer's and we had to clean out his house. And the stuff that we did ultimately just throw out had been sitting there in many cases for 35, 40 years, and while they were married and before he died, and it was no longer really
It's not
usable.
Usable, right.
So I understand that, but how many of our cupboards, closets,
Right.
are full of stuff, of clothing, that we could maybe donate? Or, I stop and think of, sometimes I have some pants that are ragged, and I think, they wouldn't be able to use that. Mightn't they be able to use that? And those are the kinds of questions we have to wrestle within ourselves as to what we're gonna do. But this is an overt individual who
Oh, yeah.
could be doing more and is by I, making it self-centered and me.
Right.
Where do we learn that attitude of sharing and giving? Do we learn that when we're a child? Do we learn that as we are middle-aged and so forth? What is the time that we can begin to teach others an attitude of sharing and giving? And yes, I know many of us give dollars, which is the easiest way of doing it
Oh,
because it
yes.
doesn't involve cleaning your closet and carrying it, like you said, in a
Right.
box and finding all of these different things. But it is part of the dilemma that we have. And does this parable say you can't have wealth?
No, I don't think it says that at all. The whole thing is, oh, now I have all of this and I have more, now I have no room for it. And you don't, if I get more than I need, and I don't have room, I'm going to share it somehow, give it away or whatever. But that's not what he did. He built a bigger barn,
He tore it down and built bigger.
yeah, and to store it up and says, oh, now I have plenty. And I can just take life easy and I don't have to work anymore. Well, gee whiz.
Yeah, nowhere in there is his thought,
Does it-
well, you know that family that's down the road that never
Uh-huh.
has anything, now I've
Right.
got enough for myself as well as for them. That's, that thought didn't come,
No.
when that thought should come, that should make him happy that he can do that. But that's not a thought that he had.
No.
So that's
He
what
thought of
made him the
keeping
fool.
it.
Yeah.
Well, that and, yeah, and now he had plenty, he didn't have to work anymore, he could just take life easy.
How can we overcome our desire to accumulate possessions? And I'm going to pick on you, Rolean, right now,
Okay.
because one of the things you would accumulate is music.
I still do.
And that's what I'm thinking.
Uh-huh.
That's something that you love, you have a passion for, but you're still playing and doing all
Right.
those things.
Yes.
But if you weren't and you kept accumulating, how do we overcome that passion? The same thing would be true for you, and I'm not sure, Lee, exactly how I could pick on you to find one thing there. But I'm sure you have something that you do accumulate, that might be very useful, it may not be. And having been an English lit major, I accumulate books.
That's what
I do that too.
And
That's what I was just thinking.
and when we
What do
moved,
you do with them?
yeah, when I moved back from Vegas many years ago, thinking I was retired, I got rid of between 400 and 500 books and gave them to people that wanted them or would use them, and didn't sell them. I probably could have, but I didn't. I just gave them to anybody who wanted them. And that kind of accumulation, and I still now go and I buy books, and I wanted to buy hardback as opposed to paperback.
Right.
And then I pass them on to my kids, and they read them, and then they take them to the store and trade them in for another book. So, there's use there. But how,
But you still accumulate.
but we still accumulate. And, I've got probably 500 books in my library right now. What am I going to do with them as I retire? And so if people out there know that you have a book that you may want, and it would be a theological type book or something dealing with church, let me know and I'll see if I have it and you can have it. But that is part of our problem, isn't it, as people? We have a tendency of wanting to accumulate together, to make a part of. Do you think the prospect of death in the parable made a difference, or does it make a difference for us today?
I think it puts things in perspective. It certainly does.
But does it change us? It didn't change this
It didn't
individual.
change
It didn't change. I don't know that he thought about it.
Okay.
You know. Some people think about it, they get rid of things as they go, which is really what you need to do. And if you want certain people to have things, you should give it to them and let them enjoy it. And you can enjoy watching them use it or have it or
Yeah,
getting
enjoy
it.
knowing that
Yeah.
you're making them happier, or making
Yeah.
their life easier, or
Uh,
giving them, providing something that they need.
Yeah, but
Because everything we have is God's. I mean, that's the perspective that
It's,
we need to look at, is that the grain in the field, all of that, is God's, is God's.
No, it's mine.
Yeah.
It's mine. I planted it.
He gave it to
I
you.
cultivated it.
yeah,
He gave it to you.
So I agree with you, but that attitude
Right,
again gets
yeah.
in the way, doesn't
I
it?
know, we get the I thing, I own it, no, we're just stewards of all this stuff.
Well, we're children of God, and
And
sometimes
use
we
it
act like
while we're
children.
here, enjoy having it. I collected in my lifetime, different things and enjoyed it while I had it.
Yeah.
And it's okay. That was then, this is now. So, but
Well, what is the lesson you can take from this parable?
Just to kind of, the lesson I take is what I was just kind of thinking about is that attitude, is having the attitude and knowing the truth is that everything we've been given is a blessing from God. And that if, there are times when you have an abundance, an overabundance, to look at that as God gave you this for a reason,
right,
not just to stick in your drawer or put it away in a closet, but it's there for a reason. And so it's time to pray and start asking, why did you give me this abundance? What do I need to do now? That's a hard thing to do. I mean, but with that attitude, working on trying to maintain that attitude would go a long way.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
well, you mentioned, when you start learning that, I think, we just start teaching our children as they are little. If you watch the little bitty kids, the first time they play with others, our human nature is just to grab it and keep it. It's mine. No, I'm not sharing. So that's when the lesson starts. Somehow you teach as you live and as you teach your children. No, share your toys. They'll give them back to you before we go,
Mhm.
okay? Let the other child have a turn, and take turns doing it. And these are just lessons that you teach your children as they go. And being a teacher in the public schools, I certainly know which children learned that and which children didn't learn that. As they, in the middle school already, you can tell or elementary school, or just, and watching all my little ones grow up now, whether they share with whoever's there. It's interesting to
I'll never
watch.
forget. It's a memory that I've had ever since it happened. I can remember it right now as though I'm there right now. And it was that first memory I have of sharing and understanding what it feels like when you don't. Anyways, here's the story. It was in Billings, Montana. I must have been maybe in first grade or kindergarten, and we were skating in the park. And it was in the middle of winter. And I remember it was dark, cold evening, you know, probably only 5 o'clock in the evening, but it was dark. And, and I was there with some other kids, I think my older sisters. And when I got cold, and I went into the warm-up house. You know, every one of these parks has a little, you know, warm-up house that the park puts out. And I'm sitting there on the benches, and there's tables and benches, and I'm sitting there, you know, there's lots of kids in there. And I was kind of facing the back of a table, and around this table was a bunch of Girl Scouts. They were there. I could kind of tell that they were about my age or a little older, and so they had just came in and sat with each other, and they were doing this skating together as a group. Well, it came time where the one girl brought out, it was a decorated coffee can with cookies in it, and they each passed the cookies around, and they went right past me, and I could see, and they went past. And they each took a cookie out, and I sat it down, and I remember kind of sitting there almost in tears. I can never forget how I felt, because they didn't even think about sharing a cookie with me. They didn't even think, and to this day, I remember how I felt. I just felt so empty and so sad, so sad. And that feeling has been with me forever. I just have never forgot how that felt, to not even be considered, you know, for a cookie. I've gotten plenty of cookies since. I had to learn how to make them myself.
But it says that that was a lesson you learned, and hopefully that had or changed your attitude about sharing as you've gone through life.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it has.
That would be the negative beginning, but it helps us. And that's important for us to remember. Well, good. You have a decision to make now. I've got 4 parables that we can look at for whichever one you want to look at for next week. The blind leading the blind, or the narrow door, or the lost and found sheep, or the counting the cost. They're all from Luke.
Yeah.
Does any of those sound like you want to tackle next week?
I like the narrow door. I like that story. There's a lot about that.
Okay.
But what was the last one about the cost?
Counting the cost.
That's always an important one, too. The cost of discipleship, is that 25?
It's
14.
in 14, 25
Yeah.
through 33, the cost of counting. And the narrow door is Luke 13.
22.
Is it 22? Yeah, the narrow door, 22 through 28.
What do you think?
29,
Lorraine,
30.
That's fine. I don't,
Well,
I think
I mean,
it's-
these are the
I'm
next
just-
2 weeks. We can,
Let's
Yeah.
do both, one of those, yeah,
Well-
each couple of weeks.
just, I'm always,
let's do the narrow
next-
door next week.
okay,
And then the
And then-
following week, the counting the cost of Luke 14.
Okay.
okay, yeah.
Thank you, and join us next week as we study these. Please take time